Good design is intentional, but it doesn't always take a straight path. Sometimes design happens by accident. Today, we're looking at 5 things that were designed by accident. The first thing we're looking at today is Play-Doh. You've played with Play-Doh, I've played with Play-Doh. I always assumed it was created for children to play with. That's not the case. Back in the day, 100 years ago or so, we used to heat our homes with coal. Coal was readily available and it heated our homes well. The downside was it was dirty. It created soot, and this soot got all over our houses, all over the walls, and needed to be cleaned. There was a company that had a material, it was a dough-like material that you could use to clean your walls. You rubbed it on your walls and it would attract the soot, but it wouldn't stay on your walls. It wouldn't stick on your walls. It was a cleaning tool. Everything was great for this company. People were using their product to take soot off their walls, and then something happened. We stopped using coal to heat our homes. We started using natural gas. Well, it wasn't dirty anymore. Our homes weren't dirty, which was wonderful for everybody except for the guy who created the dough to clean the walls. He filed for bankruptcy, but before it went through, he realized that his sister, who was a teacher, had been using that dough in her classrooms as a modeling dough for children. And that's how we know it as Play-Doh today. The second accidental design was Teflon. A chemist was playing with combining tetrafluoroethylene, yeah, that's the word, with hydrochloric acid. And he was experimenting with this and then wanted to walk away from it for a while. And so he cooled it down and pressurized it in canisters and left for a few days. When he came back, the gas was no longer in the canister. But he weighed it and he knew it was still there because it weighed the same. So he cut the canister open and he realized that these two chemicals had formed a coating on the inside of the canister. And that coating had some pretty interesting properties. It was slick and it didn't react with things that were on it. Then what happened was a guy was using it, he would spray it on his fishing tackle so it wouldn't get tangled up. And his wife looked at that and said, I want you to spray my pans with that because if it's slippery, maybe the food won't stick to the pan. Well, she was right, and that's how Teflon is commonly used in your house today. The third accidental invention was silly putty. During World War II, the military was unable to get enough rubber for tires, rubber for different equipment. Places where we usually harvested rubber trees were not available to us. And so the government put out a call to chemists and said, please try to come up with a synthetic rubber. So a chemist at GE tried combining boric acid and silicone oil, and he came up with something that was pretty rubbery. But he sent it to the government, and apparently it was not close enough for government work. So the government rejected it. He sent it to other chemists to try to figure out what people could do with it. And everybody rejected it. The people who did like it actually were at his parties. They liked playing with it, throwing it against the wall. They thought it was pretty cool, but nobody could figure out what to do with it. Years later, an unemployed man who had been playing with the silly putty bought the rights for $147, marketed it as a toy, put it in an egg because it was close to Easter, marketed it as a toy, and the rest is history. That's silly putty today. The fourth accidental invention is synthetic dye. We always used to use plant dyes and different organic dyes. What happened was a chemist was trying to come up with a synthetic alternative to quinine, which was a drug used for malaria. In doing so, he just made this big mess. It was one of the experiments that went wrong. But what was interesting about it was it created in his petri dish this weird sort of purplish color that he named mauve. And this was the first synthetic dye. And he actually got very rich creating a lot of mauve items. Later, as people were playing with this combination, they came up with a lot of different colors, and that's how synthetic dyes were born. Incidentally, while playing with sort of similar combinations and trying to create dyes, somebody else came up with the synthetic quinine for malaria. The fifth accidental invention were sticky notes. So here's how it happened. A chemist at 3M was actually trying to create a really strong adhesive for the aerospace industry when he came up with something exactly the opposite. It was a weak adhesive. And what was interesting about this weak adhesive is that you could use it over and over again, and it didn't really lose its sticky properties. His idea was he wanted to paint the adhesive on bulletin boards so that instead of using a tack, you could just stick paper to it. 3M wasn't really interested. It didn't happen. Later, another guy at 3M who was in the choir of his church had a bunch of bookmarks in his hymnal, and they kept falling out and making a mess. So he went to the guy who originally created this and said, listen, instead of putting this tape on the bulletin board, would you put it on some paper? And I'm going to use those as bookmarks. The guy thought it was a great idea. He did just that. It was another 3 years before 3M produced the sticky notes, and now we have them everywhere. So that's 5 accidental designs. You know, it seems like there are a lot of mistakes made by chemists. I mean, they've been making a big mess, but guess what? Sometimes it turns out really well. That's what experimentation is. And sometimes when you're designing and it doesn't work out, take a look and see, is there something else this can be used for? Is there something about it that's interesting? Sometimes there are happy accidents. So what accidental designs do you know of that are interesting? Also, have you accidentally forgotten to subscribe? Do that now. I'll see you next week.